Why did the smallest state in America tell the Founding Fathers to write the Constitution without them, and then only joined the country when threatened with foreign trade tariffs? Welcome to 71 Dumbest Things from Rhode Island, where we are exposing the wildest historical facts, like the time 26 pirates were all hanged on the exact same day on one single scaffold, alongside the absurd law that makes it illegal to throw pickle juice on a trolley, and the myths you still believe, like thinking this tiny state played no role in building America. We are proving which insane stories are 100% real history and which are just smuggled in lies. So hit that subscribe button before we reveal the truth. 1. You probably think every state was thrilled to join America from day one, but Rhode Island looked at the brand new Constitution and said no thanks. While all 12 other colonies signed on and started celebrating, Rhode Island sat there completely unbothered for 3 entire years. The federal government got so frustrated they threatened to treat Rhode Island like a foreign country with trade tariffs. And only then did Rhode Island finally agree to join the nation it technically helped create. 2. Most Americans think July 4th was the big freedom moment, but Rhode Island already handled that 2 months earlier. On May 4th, 1776, Rhode Island officially cut ties with Britain before any other colony had the nerve to even say independence out loud. The rest of the colonies were still debating and nervously drafting papers, while Rhode Island had already filed the paperwork and moved on. To this day, Rhode Island celebrates May 4th as its own Independence Day, which the rest of America completely ignores every single year. 3. Rhode Island is so small that the entire state fits inside Alaska 425 times. Yet somehow this tiny place decided it needed 39 completely separate municipalities, each operating under their own independent local laws. That means 39 different sets of rules, 39 different local governments, and 39 different ways of doing things, all crammed into a state smaller than Los Angeles County. Rhode Island is basically 39 mini-countries stacked inside a place most Americans accidentally skip when looking at a map. 4. Rhode Island has the longest official state name in all of America, and when voters were asked in 2010 if they wanted to shorten it, they said absolutely not. The full name is State of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, which is 5 words longer than any other state bothered with. Every other state kept things simple, but Rhode Island looked at that long, complicated name, used it for over 360 years, and when given the democratic chance to finally trim it down, the people voted to keep every single word exactly as it was. 5. Rhode Island was founded specifically so people could practice any religion freely without government interference, which makes it absolutely hilarious that Christmas was banned there during the colonial era. The Puritan influence pushed anti-Christmas rules that made celebrating December 25th an actual legal offense inside a colony built entirely on religious freedom. Roger Williams created this place so nobody could be punished for their beliefs, and then the people living there turned around and made holiday celebrations illegal, which is perhaps the most spectacular betrayal of founding principles in colonial American history. 6. The first circus ever performed in America did not happen in New York or Philadelphia. It happened in Rhode Island in 1774, organized by a man named John Bill Ricketts. Ricketts later took his circus show on the road and performed directly for George Washington himself, which means the father of America sat in an audience and watched a circus that was born in the smallest state in the country. Rhode Island quietly gave America its very first taste of big top entertainment, and somehow nobody ever puts that on a bumper sticker. 7. Rhode Island's 1663 Royal Charter was so powerfully written that colonists did not bother replacing it even after independence, using it as their actual functioning constitution for 180 years. While every other state drafted new governing documents after the Revolution, Rhode Island just kept running the same charter King Charles II handed them like it was still perfectly fine. 180 years is longer than most countries have existed as independent nations, and Rhode Island spent all that time governed by a document a British king wrote for them as a colonial favor. 8. Bristol, Rhode Island, has been celebrating the 4th of July every single year since 1785, making it the oldest continuous Independence Day celebration in all of America. While the rest of the country was still figuring out what being a nation even meant, Bristol was already organizing parades and firing cannons annually, like a tradition that had existed forever. They have never missed a year since, which means Bristol has been doing 4th of July longer than most American cities have actually existed. Yet somehow New York always gets credit for the big celebrations. 9. Rhode Island at its colonial peak had more rum distilleries packed per square mile than anywhere else in America, and actually used rum as functioning currency in overseas trade deals. This was not just a drinking preference, this was a structured economic system where barrels of rum worked like money when dealing with foreign merchants. Rhode Island merchants shipped rum out, received goods back, and kept the whole cycle running on alcohol. Essentially, the smallest state in America built its early economy on liquor and then used that financial foundation to act as independently as possible from everyone around them. 10. Every single state sent delegates to the Constitutional Convention in 1787 to help write the document that would govern America forever, except Rhode Island, which simply did not show up. No delegates, no representatives, no note explaining the absence, just nothing. The entire United States Constitution was written, argued over, and finalized without Rhode Island participating in any part of the process. Rhode Island then spent the next 3 years refusing to ratify the document that strangers wrote without them, which is honestly a completely reasonable response to being left out of your own country's founding paperwork. 11. Rhode Island is only 48 miles long, but has a coastline stretching 400 miles, which sounds impossible until you realize the bays and inlets twist so severely they multiply the measurable shoreline into something that defies basic logic. Rhode Island is one of the smallest states, yet its coastline beats several states 3 times its size, and the map looks so tangled it appears to be a geographical accident rather than something that actually exists in real life. 12. Rhode Island chose coffee milk as their official state drink, a local invention of sweetened coffee syrup mixed into cold milk that the rest of America has never encountered. When people outside Rhode Island hear coffee milk, they assume someone made it up entirely. Rhode Island residents respond with genuine pity for everyone who has never tried it. Every other state picked something normal like orange juice, and Rhode Island looked at those reasonable options and decided all of them were simply not good enough for a state this particular. 13. Samuel Slater could not legally carry textile blueprints out of Britain, so he memorized the entire mill design inside his head and rebuilt America's first fully automated textile mill from pure memory in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, in 1793. Britain called him a traitor. America called him the father of the Industrial Revolution. Both countries are describing the exact same man doing the exact same thing, just from opposite sides of the ocean with completely opposite feelings about whether he deserved a statue or a prison cell. 14. In 1824, female mill workers in Pawtucket, Rhode Island walked off the job over wage cuts and longer hours, creating the first organized labor strike by women ever recorded in American history. They had no unions and no legal protections whatsoever. They simply stopped working and refused to return, inventing organized worker resistance from scratch in the smallest state in America, decades before formal labor movements existed anywhere in the country or anyone had developed proper language to describe what a labor strike actually was. 15. Rhode Island passed the first American law banning the import of enslaved people in 1774, while simultaneously controlling 60 to 70% of all colonial slave trade shipping in America. Over 1,000 documented voyages launched directly from Providence and Newport alone. The same colony that outlawed the practice on paper was physically operating the majority of the entire Atlantic trade at the exact same time. Rhode Island held 2 completely opposing positions simultaneously and never once offered the world a satisfying explanation for how that was acceptable. 16. Rhode Island raised the first Rhode Island Regiment in 1778 by promising freedom to any enslaved man who enlisted, creating one of the earliest racially integrated military units in American history. Black and white soldiers served together in official Continental Army formations during the Revolutionary War. This is the same Rhode Island that operated the majority of American slave trade shipping, meaning the smallest state was simultaneously running the slave trade and building one of the first integrated armies, a contradiction almost too large for such a tiny place to contain. 17. The oldest surviving Jewish synagogue in America is not in New York. It sits in Newport, Rhode Island, and George Washington personally wrote the congregation a letter in 1790 promising full religious protection under the new government. He wrote directly to the Truro synagogue specifically, not a general announcement to everyone. Most Americans have never read that letter, never visited that synagogue, and have no idea the oldest one in the entire country sits quietly in a small coastal city. Most people only associate with mansions and sailing. 18. Roger Williams founded Rhode Island in 1636 on the explicit principle of separating church from state, making it the first government in the entire Western world to formally keep religion out of civil law. Every other colonial government had religion built directly into governance, but Williams built Rhode Island, so that could never happen. He turned his winter banishment from Massachusetts into the founding principle of an entirely new kind of government that nobody else anywhere had ever attempted before him. 19. Newport hosted the America's Cup sailing race every year from 1930 through 1983, a 53-year streak making Newport the undisputed sailing capital of the world. A special bolted display case was built in Newport permanently to house the trophy because nobody believed it was ever leaving. Then Australia won in 1983, the first foreign team to win in 132 years, and they needed the bolts professionally removed just to take the trophy home. Newport had held it so long the display case had essentially become a permanent piece of local furniture. 20. Rhode Island built the first enclosed shopping mall in America in 1828, and the Westminster Arcade is still standing in downtown Providence today. It had a covered roof, indoor walkways, and shops on both sides, which is exactly what a mall is, built before electricity existed and before the Civil War happened. Rhode Island invented the indoor shopping experience nearly 200 years ago, while most states that now contain giant malls were not even states yet, which is the kind of historical fact that makes mall historians genuinely emotional. 21. Newport, Rhode Island, hosted the very first United States National Lawn Tennis Championship in 1881, played on a grass court at the Newport Casino that is still physically standing and operational today. Tennis in America did not begin in New York or California or Florida. It began in the smallest state at a Gilded Age social club built for the ultra-wealthy. The court where American tennis was literally invented is still there, still playable, and almost nobody outside Rhode Island knows it exists. 22. Newport, Rhode Island, hosted the first international automobile race in America on September 6, 1900, organized by William K. Vanderbilt II on a horse racing track, featuring both gasoline and steam-powered vehicles competing directly against each other. This was not a small local event. This was a full international competition happening in a state most people associate with sailboats rather than engines. The entire origin story of American motorsports technically begins in Rhode Island, and almost nobody in the automotive world ever mentions that when telling it. 23. Rhode Island's jewelry and silverware industry, at its absolute peak, was producing nearly 1/3 of all costume jewelry sold across the entire United States. This tiny state was quietly manufacturing a massive portion of everything Americans wore around their necks and on their fingers without most people having any idea where it came from. Rhode Island was not known for glamour or fashion, yet was single-handedly supplying 1/3 of the entire country's costume jewelry market from inside the smallest state in America. 24. In 1975, 8 men robbed a secret mafia vault hidden inside a fur storage building in Providence in what became known as the Bonded Vault Heist, walking away with roughly $30 million that has never been fully recovered. The vault was not a bank. It was a secret underground facility the mob used to hide cash and valuables. 8 men successfully robbed organized crime directly and mostly got away with it, which means Providence, Rhode Island, is where someone decided robbing the local mafia personally was a completely reasonable plan. 25. Block Island belongs entirely to Rhode Island, yet sits geographically closer to New York than to Providence, meaning New York is literally right there and has absolutely zero authority over anything happening on it. No New York jurisdiction, no New York laws, nothing from New York applies despite being able to practically see Long Island from the shore. Rhode Island owns a piece of land physically closer to a completely different state, and that other state has never once been given any say in what happens there. 26. Rhode Island clam chowder is the only regional American chowder that is completely clear with no cream and no tomato base. and Rhode Islanders consider both the Manhattan and New England versions a genuine culinary insult. While the rest of America argues about whether chowder should be white or red, Rhode Island has been quietly serving a third entirely different version that most of the country does not even know exists. Ordering it outside Rhode Island requires a full explanation before the kitchen understands what you are asking for. 27. The stuffed quahog clam, known locally as a stuffy, is Rhode Island's most iconic dish, so deeply local that it has never once appeared on any national restaurant chain menu in American history. Every major food chain has found a way to put regional dishes on national menus, but nobody has ever successfully taken the stuffy national. It exists almost exclusively within Rhode Island borders, eaten primarily by people who grew up there, and remains one of the most stubbornly local foods in the entire country despite being genuinely delicious. 28. Rhode Island has a hot dog called the New York system. Wiener served with meat sauce, mustard, onion, and celery salt that has absolutely no connection to New York and which actual New Yorkers have genuinely never heard of. Nobody in New York knows what a New York system wiener is, nobody makes them there, and nobody has ever ordered one there. Rhode Island invented a food, named it after a completely different state, and that other state remains entirely unaware this food exists or that their name is attached to it. 29. Rhode Island was the very last of the original 13 states to ratify the United States Constitution, finally agreeing in May 1790 only after the new federal government threatened to impose foreign trade tariffs on Rhode Island, as if it were a hostile overseas nation. Every other state had already signed, and the government was fully operational before Rhode Island agreed to join. Rhode Island held out so stubbornly that the country had to economically threaten its own founding member just to get it to officially join the nation it had helped create. 30. Rhode Island's Dorr Rebellion of 1842 was a full-armed uprising where two completely separate governments simultaneously claimed to be the only legitimate authority running the state. Thomas Dorr led one government while the existing establishment ran another, both issuing laws and making appointments as if the other simply did not exist. Rhode Island had two governors and two legislatures operating at the exact same time until federal intervention forced a resolution. Two rival governments fighting over one state is chaotic, but doing it inside the smallest state in America makes it completely absurd. 31. The Gaspee Affair of 1772 was the moment Rhode Island colonists rowed out into Narragansett Bay, boarded a British naval vessel, and burned it completely to the waterline, making it the first act of organized violent resistance against Britain in colonial America. This happened a full year before the Boston Tea Party, meaning Rhode Island threw the first real punch in the entire American Revolution, and Boston got all the historical credit. The men who burned the Gaspee were never prosecuted because no Rhode Island jury was ever going to convict them. 32. Rhode Island operated its own completely independent postal system before the United States Post Office even existed, and then resisted handing control over to the federal government for years after independence was achieved. Every other state folded their mail operations into the new federal system without much argument, but Rhode Island kept running its own postal service and refused to give it up. This is a state that independently handled its own mail, its own navy, and its own government for so long that surrendering any of those systems to federal control felt genuinely offensive to them. 33. Newport, Rhode Island, was one of the 5 largest cities in all of colonial America, a major economic and cultural center that competed directly with Boston and New York for dominance. Today, Newport has a population under 25,000 people, and most Americans have never visited it or could not find it on a map without help. One of colonial America's most powerful cities shrank into a small coastal town, while the cities it competed with grew into some of the most recognized urban centers in the entire world, which is a remarkable reversal of historical fortune. 34. The Breakers Mansion in Newport was built by the Vanderbilt family in 1895, contains 70 rooms, cost a staggering amount of money to construct, and was used exclusively as a summer cottage where the family lived for roughly 10 weeks per year. 10 weeks? The Vanderbilts built one of the largest and most elaborately decorated private residences in American history, specifically to use it for 2.5 months annually and then leave. Most Americans cannot afford a one-bedroom apartment, and the Vanderbilts needed 70 rooms for a vacation property they barely used. 35. Rhode Island's Fort Adams was completed in 1857 as one of the largest coastal fortifications ever constructed in America, built to defend Narragansett Bay with massive walls, elaborate gun placements, and enough capacity to house thousands of soldiers. It never fired a single shot in any military conflict during its entire existence. The entire purpose of Fort Adams was to defend Rhode Island from attack, and Rhode Island was never attacked, meaning the largest fortification in the state's history spent its entire operational life as an extremely expensive and impressively constructed piece of architecture that nobody ever actually needed. 36. Rhode Island had a thriving whaling industry operating out of Newport throughout the 1700s, launching voyages into the Atlantic long before New Bedford. Massachusetts became the name everyone associates with American whaling. Rhode Island was doing it first and doing it significantly. Yet somehow New Bedford absorbed all the historical recognition while Rhode Island's earlier whaling history got buried. Newport launched whaling voyages before New Bedford was even a serious port, which means the state that gets zero credit for American whaling was actually there doing it before the state that gets all the credit even showed up. 37. Providence launched one of the first electric streetcar networks in all of New England in 1892, a cable car system that connected the city and moved residents around for decades. Then, in 1948, the entire system was completely dismantled with almost no public debate, no major protests, and no significant historical documentation of why the decision was made or who made it. One of the earliest electric transit networks in the region simply vanished within a few decades, and Providence spent the following generations dealing with traffic problems that the streetcar system had been specifically designed to prevent. 38. Rhode Island abolished the death penalty on February 11, 1852, becoming only the second state in America to do so right after Michigan, and has not executed a single person since 1845. Rhode Island effectively stopped executions first and then made it officially illegal 7 years later, almost as a formality. While most of the country spent another century debating capital punishment and carrying out executions, Rhode Island quietly handled the entire issue in 1852 and moved on without making a particularly large announcement to anyone about what they had just decided to permanently stop doing. 39. The International Tennis Hall of Fame is not located in New York or Florida or California. It sits in Newport, Rhode Island, inside a building that was originally a Gilded Age social club built exclusively for the ultra-wealthy. The Newport Casino was constructed in 1880 as a private playground for the richest families in America, and today houses the official Hall of Fame for an entire global sport. The building where American tennis royalty is permanently honored was originally designed so that extremely wealthy people had somewhere comfortable to spend their summers away from everyone else. 40. Rhode Island has more Dunkin' locations per capita than any other state in America, with roughly one location for every 7,000 residents at peak saturation. This means Rhode Island is so thoroughly covered in Dunkin' that a Rhode Island resident is statistically almost never more than a few minutes away from one at any given point in their daily life. While other states have Dunkin' locations, Rhode Island has achieved a level of Dunkin' density that coffee chain analysts genuinely use as a benchmark when discussing what maximum market saturation actually looks like in practice. 41. Rhode Island's State House Dome is the fourth largest unsupported marble dome in the entire world, ranking behind only St. Peter's Basilica, the Minnesota State Capitol, and the Taj Mahal. Most Americans assume impressive architectural domes exist only in major world capitals or ancient empires. One of them is sitting in Providence, Rhode Island, a state most people think of as that small place between Boston and New York that you accidentally drive through without noticing. Rhode Island has the fourth most impressive dome on the planet and barely mentions it. 42. Providence was a documented major stop on the Underground Railroad with verified safe houses that helped hundreds of freedom seekers move north before the Civil War. This was not informal or accidental. Providence had an organized network of people and locations specifically designed to move enslaved people toward freedom. Rhode Island, the same colony that once controlled the majority of American slave trade shipping, later became one of the documented pathways helping enslaved people escape that exact system, which is another entry in Rhode Island's very long list of historical contradictions that take considerable time to fully process. 43. Rhode Island passed the first law in America prohibiting the import of enslaved people in 1774, while simultaneously operating as the dominant center of the entire Atlantic slave trade shipping industry. The colony that made importing enslaved people illegal on paper was the exact same colony physically running the majority of the trade at sea. Rhode Island managed to be both the first state to legally oppose the slave trade and the state most financially invested in keeping it running, holding both positions simultaneously without apparently finding that arrangement particularly uncomfortable or worth explaining to anyone. 44. Samuel Slater built America's first textile mill, but Britain called him Slater the Traitor for smuggling industrial knowledge out of the country, while Americans called him the father of the Industrial Revolution. He could not carry blueprints legally, so he memorized every technical detail of a working British mill entirely inside his head and reconstructed it from pure memory in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. The same act of memorization made him a celebrated hero in one country and a despised criminal in another, and both countries were describing the exact same man doing the exact same thing. 45. Roger Williams was banished from Massachusetts in the middle of winter in 1635 with nowhere to go and no plan for survival. Instead of dying in the cold, Williams found the Narragansett tribe, lived among them, and learned their language so fluently he became one of the few colonial settlers who could communicate with Native Americans directly without an interpreter. He then used those relationships to purchase land and found Rhode Island. The entire colony exists because one man was thrown out into a Massachusetts winter and responded by learning a new language and building a new government. 46. The Narragansett tribe native to Rhode Island was nearly completely destroyed during King Philip's War of 1675, one of the deadliest conflicts per capita in all of American history, fought largely on Rhode Island soil. Rhode Island was not a distant battlefield. It was the central ground where much of the fighting happened, and where the Narragansett people, who had originally helped Rhode Island's founders survive the winter, were nearly wiped out entirely within a single brutal conflict that most American history classes spend very little time actually discussing or explaining in any real detail. 47. Rhode Island's General Assembly once passed an actual law, making it completely illegal to practice law in the state, unless you were born in Rhode Island. A protectionist rule so absurd it sounds invented, but stood for years before being struck down. Rhode Island created a legal system where lawyers were selected based entirely on birthplace, rather than qualifications or training. The state essentially decided the best way to protect its legal profession was to make sure only Rhode Island-born people were ever allowed anywhere near a courtroom, regardless of how qualified everyone else actually was. 48. The Rhode Island Red Chicken breed was developed in Little Compton, Rhode Island in the 1850s and became so significant to the state it was named the official state bird. Rhode Island looked at every available option, including eagles and hawks, and chose a chicken. A domestic farm chicken. The Rhode Island Red is genuinely an important agricultural development and a historically significant breed, but deciding to make a chicken, the official symbol of your entire state, is a choice that requires a very specific level of confidence that most other states simply do not possess. 49. Rhode Island hosted the first national automobile show in America in 1900, a fact almost entirely absent from automotive history books that consistently credit New York instead. Rhode Island was putting cars on public display before New York organized anything comparable, yet the historical record assigned New York the credit and left Rhode Island completely out of the origin story of American car culture entirely. Rhode Island hosted the first automobile show in the country, and the country responded by forgetting Rhode Island was involved at all, which is a very familiar outcome for this particular state. 50. The Providence River running through downtown was so severely contaminated by industrial waste by the early 1900s that scientists officially declared it biologically dead, meaning nothing could survive in it whatsoever. It took until the 1980s for any living organisms to return to the water at all. A major river running through the capital city was so thoroughly destroyed by industrial pollution that it spent decades as a moving channel of poison running through the middle of downtown, while the city built around it and treated the entire situation as completely normal and acceptable. 51. Rhode Island's fishing industry for quahog clams was once the largest single-species shellfish harvesting operation on the entire United States East Coast. This tiny state sitting at the edge of the Atlantic was pulling more quahog clams out of the water than any other state along the entire eastern seaboard. The quahog is not just a food source in Rhode Island. It is a cultural institution that shows up in the state drink, the state dish, and the daily life of coastal communities in a way that outsiders genuinely cannot fully appreciate without living there. 52. The First Baptist Church in America was founded in Providence, Rhode Island by Roger Williams in 1638, making Rhode Island the literal birthplace of the entire Baptist denomination in the New World. Today, the Baptist Church has tens of millions of members across America and represents one of the largest Protestant denominations in the country. Every single one of those congregations traces its American origin back to a small church Roger Williams built in Providence after being thrown out of Massachusetts, which means the man who got expelled for his beliefs accidentally created one of America's largest religious movements. 53. A Rhode Island governor named Benedict Arnold served 5 respected terms as a colonial leader in the 1660s and 1670s and was considered one of the most capable administrators in early Rhode Island history. He was also the great-great-grandfather of the famous Benedict Arnold, who betrayed America during the Revolutionary War and became the most notorious traitor in American history. Rhode Island produced both a celebrated founding governor and the most infamous traitor the country ever created. And they shared the exact same name, which is the kind of historical coincidence that seems too strange to be real. 54. The Sprague family of Rhode Island built a textile empire so enormous in the 1800s that historians have documented they effectively controlled the entire state government through financial and political leverage. They owned mills, banks, railroads, and political careers simultaneously, operating less like a business family and more like a shadow government running Rhode Island from behind the scenes. The Spragues were so powerful that opposing them politically in Rhode Island was considered professionally suicidal, and they maintained that grip on the state for decades before their empire eventually collapsed in one of the most dramatic financial failures in New England history. 55. Rhode Island's population density ranks second in the entire United States behind only New Jersey, which comes as a genuine shock to most Americans who associate Rhode Island with quaint seaside towns and empty countryside. Rhode Island is not empty at all. It is one of the most densely packed states in the entire country, with people crammed into a space so small that the population density numbers look more like a major city than a state. The popular cultural image of Rhode Island as a quiet little place is statistically one of the most inaccurate perceptions of any state in America. 56. Marble House in Newport was built in 1892 for Alva Vanderbilt at a cost of $11 million, which equals roughly $350 million in today's money, and it was given to her by her husband as a birthday present for her 39th birthday. A $350 million building as a birthday gift. Not jewelry, not a vacation, not even a yacht. An entire marble mansion in Newport, Rhode Island, constructed specifically to celebrate one woman turning 39. The Vanderbilts operated at a financial scale so disconnected from normal human experience that their birthday gift budget alone could fund entire cities. 57. Rhode Island's resistance to British navigation acts during the colonial era was so aggressive and so consistent that British customs officials routinely refused to take assignments in Providence, officially describing it as the most lawless port city in colonial America. Customs officers assigned to Providence faced open hostility, ignored regulations, and merchants who simply did not comply with anything Britain told them to do. Britain kept trying to enforce trade laws in Rhode Island, and Rhode Island kept operating as if those laws were merely interesting suggestions made by people with no actual authority over anything happening in their port. 58. The Sprague Mansion. In Cranston, Rhode Island is the site of an actual unsolved murder from 1843, where the victim was one of the most powerful industrialists in all of New England, and nobody was ever successfully prosecuted for the crime. A man at the absolute peak of economic and political power in the region was murdered, and the case was never resolved. The Sprague family was so deeply connected to Rhode Island's legal and political systems that mounting a successful prosecution against anyone connected to their world was essentially impossible, and the murder remains officially unsolved to this day. 59. Rhode Island's economy in the 1700s was so thoroughly dependent on illegal trade with French Caribbean colonies that British officials estimated more than half of all goods moving through Newport at any given time were smuggled. More than half. The majority of Newport's entire commercial economy was built on illegal trade, while British customs officers stood nearby unable to stop any of it. Rhode Island was not occasionally bending trade rules. It had constructed its entire economic foundation on systematic smuggling, and then dared British authorities to do something meaningful about it, which they largely could not. 60. Providence built its entire downtown on land filled in over buried rivers, rerouting the Woonasquatucket and Moshassuck rivers underground and paving an entire city center directly on top of them during 19th century development. The rivers did not disappear. They were simply buried beneath the streets and buildings of downtown Providence while the city grew above them, completely unaware that two rivers were still flowing underneath everything. Providence essentially built itself on top of hidden moving water and then forgot about it for over a century before anyone decided to uncover and restore what was buried down there. 61. Rhode Island's first governor. Arthur Fenner served continuously from 1790 to 1805, winning re-election for 15 unbroken years in a state with absolutely no term limit stopping him. Rhode Island had just finished fighting a revolution partially about the dangers of unchecked political power, and then immediately handed one man uninterrupted control for 15 consecutive years. They threw off a king, wrote a constitution, and then gave a single governor a 15-year unbroken run without apparently noticing that was exactly the kind of arrangement they had just fought a war to escape. 62. The first Rhode Island almanac was published in Newport in 1728 by James Franklin, the older brother of Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin went on to publish Poor Richard's Almanac 5 years later and became one of the most famous Americans in history. The Franklin family had a very specific interest in almanacs, and the older brother got there first, doing it in Newport, Rhode Island before his younger sibling became the founding father every American schoolchild memorizes. James Franklin started the almanac tradition in Rhode Island, and Benjamin Franklin got all the lasting historical credit for it. 63. Rhode Island's charter granted by King Charles II in 1663 was so unusually generous that the colony operated as a virtual independent republic for over 100 years before the Revolution started. Britain handed Rhode Island a document giving them remarkable autonomy, and Rhode Island used every word of it to run themselves as independently as possible for a full century. When the Revolution came, Rhode Island was already so practiced at self-governance that declaring independence felt less like a dramatic new beginning, and more like making an already existing arrangement officially permanent on paper. 64. Rhode Island officially dropped the words Providence Plantations from its full state name, but only after a statewide referendum in 2020, nearly 360 years after those words first appeared. For 360 years, Rhode Island carried a name with deeply uncomfortable historical associations while repeatedly declining to change it. When voters got the chance to remove those words in 2010, they actually voted to keep them. It took another decade and another vote before Rhode Island finally agreed to update a name that had been sitting completely unchanged since 1663, when a British king originally wrote it down. 65. Mount Hope Farm in Bristol. Rhode Island was the actual military headquarters of Metacom, the Wampanoag leader known as King Philip, before King Philip's War erupted in 1675 and devastated the entire region. The land where one of the most significant Native American leaders in history planned and launched a catastrophic war is still intact, still accessible, and open to the public today. Most Americans have never heard of Mount Hope Farm, despite it being one of the most historically significant pieces of land sitting quietly and largely unrecognized anywhere in the entire country. 66. Rhode Island's smuggling economy was so deeply entrenched that when Britain stationed the revenue schooner Gaspee in Narragansett Bay to stop illegal trade, local residents rowed out at night, boarded the ship, and burned it completely to the waterline before rowing calmly back to shore. Britain demanded the attackers be identified and prosecuted. No Rhode Island resident provided any useful information whatsoever. Nobody was ever charged with anything. Rhode Island burned a British naval vessel, and the entire community collectively decided they had absolutely no idea who did it or where those people currently lived. 67. Rhode Island passed one of the earliest anti-dueling laws in colonial America in 1728, making dueling officially illegal anywhere in the state. Documented dueling-related deaths continued occurring in Rhode Island for more than a century after that law was passed. Rhode Island told its residents dueling was illegal, and its residents responded by continuing to duel each other for the next 100 years, as if the law was a mildly interesting suggestion rather than an actual enforceable legal prohibition, with real consequences that the government was apparently not particularly motivated to enforce on anyone. 68. Woonsocket. Rhode Island has the highest percentage of French-Canadian descended residents of any city in the entire United States, a direct result of massive millworker immigration from Quebec during the late 1800s. So many French-Canadians settled in Woonsocket that the city developed its own distinct cultural identity with French newspapers, French Catholic churches, and French community organizations operating well into the 20th century. This created a deeply French-Canadian city sitting inside a small American state that most people outside New England have genuinely never heard of or thought about visiting. 69. Rhode Island's rubber industry briefly made it the leading producer of rubber goods in the entire nation during the 1850s, a period of industrial dominance so completely forgotten it appears in almost no mainstream American history books anywhere. Rhode Island was manufacturing more rubber products than any other state in the country, and then that entire chapter of its economic history vanished from the historical record entirely. The state that led American rubber production gets zero recognition for it, while states with far less significant manufacturing histories receive considerably more attention in every standard history curriculum taught across the country. 70. Rhode Island raised its own completely independent navy during the American Revolution, called the Rhode Island Navy, making it one of the only individual colonies to field an entirely separate naval force. This was an organized, independent operation that Rhode Island funded and commanded entirely on its own, while also contributing to the Continental Army. A colony so small it fits inside Alaska 425 times, decided it needed its own personal navy because apparently contributing to the shared continental forces was simply not quite independent enough to satisfy Rhode Island's very particular and well-documented need to do everything separately. 71. Rhode Island executed 26 pirates in a single day on July 19, 1723. Hanging all of them simultaneously on one scaffold in one of the largest mass executions in American colonial history. Those 26 executions represented roughly half of all executions Rhode Island ever carried out after achieving statehood, meaning the state used up a massive portion of its entire execution history in one single afternoon. Rhode Island built a scaffold large enough to hang 26 men at once, used it exactly one time, and that one afternoon still accounts for half of everything the state ever executed. Rhode Island is literally the smallest state in America, yet it abolished the death penalty before almost everyone, burned a British warship and blamed nobody, and built a shopping mall before electricity existed. Which fact broke your brain the most? Drop it in the comments right now because I genuinely need to know. And if you survived all 71 of these without questioning everything you learned in history class, hit subscribe because the Dumbest Things channel has an entire world of this waiting for you.